Right, so our keynote speaker today is Dr. Carol Barnum. She's been helping clients to understand their users. Has authored a number of books on the subject over the last 20 years and is also currently the co-founder and director of user research for UX firm in Atlanta, Georgia. She's an award-winning author and speaker, and her awards and recognition include STC Fellow, Rainey Award for Excellence in Research, Gould Award for Excellence in Teaching Technical Communication, and most recently the IEEE Professional Communication Society named her for the 2013 recipient of the Roland S. Blick Award.
Ron Blick.
Sorry. For distinction in technical communication. So I'd like to welcome Carol to the stage.
So I think I have all my technology going. Can you hear me okay? Yep. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I've lost count. I think this is my third TCANZ over the years. Marjorie would probably know better than I. But it's a pleasure to be back. It's great to see it thriving so much. It's really sad to see Christchurch, but I'm very hopeful that all the cranes are a sign of growth coming very soon. So. I'm going to be very informal in my presentation today. I know I don't have a full hour and 10 minutes on purpose. I want you to interrupt me as I go along. If you have questions, there should definitely be time at the end for questions. It doesn't necessarily have to be about content strategy. We can talk about anything user experience, since it seems that so far I'm the only one here talking about user experience. If you've got questions that maybe haven't been answered so far, I'd be glad to try to chat with you about anything that I might know something about. And I'm going to get down off the stage, but I'm not going to be able to leap up and down like some of the speakers have, because I do want to wander around. So, to get started, I'm going to be talking about content strategy, which is a sort of change maker, and I don't know how much you know about it here in New Zealand, but the title of my talk is How to Get It, How to Test It. So I'm going to be focusing on what content strategy is, how it's become a very rapidly growing, new, evolving discipline for technical communicators, and how, as technical communicators, we can use this as a growth opportunity, and also even in our current jobs, particularly in our current jobs, we can apply what we do, which is writing content, that's what we do, to doing usability testing to understand whether the content is working for our users or not. And I'm going to share the experience of doing usability testing in two case studies. One in which the content strategy wasn't there and the product failed, and one in which the focus was on content strategy and the usability testing clearly demonstrated one type of content as being far more effective than another. So that's kind of the approach to my talk. So interrupt as we go along if you've got questions. So first of all, we're going to start with the definition of content strategy, and here it is. The planning, development, and management of informational content written or in other media. The term is particularly common in web development since the late 1990s. And this, by the way, is Wikipedia. So those blue links are, if you were online, would be taking you to other things in Wikipedia. It is recognized as a field in user experience design, but also draws interest from adjacent communities such as content management, business analysis, and technical communication. So in the Wikipedia definition, you see that content strategy is a convergence of a lot of current disciplines that include technical communication, usability, and other related disciplines, which I think is very exciting for us. It opens up a lot of career opportunities. Put simply then, the content strategy is the practice of planning for the creation, delivery, and governance of useful, usable content. So it really has very little to do with the actual writing of content, which is what a lot of us currently do. It's much more of a strategy. That's why it's called content strategy. So it's much more at the management level, and that's exciting because it provides career opportunities ladder to move up in an organization. And it will require persuasiveness, which we've been getting some good sessions on how to persuade people to change their thinking and so forth. It requires persuasiveness to show your organization how it can benefit from content strategy if it doesn't currently have it. Now, if we want to trace the roots of the movement, you will see in the red circle in the middle who we are, that we are a melding of a lot of different things for content strategy. So there are people who are specifically content strategists, and in the United States in particular, where this does seem to have emerged first, you will see jobs for content strategists, which is quite exciting. But we are also technical communicators, we are information architects, we are content management folks, and I know some of you do content management now and use systems like Data and so forth to help you manage it. But it's more than managing the content, it's managing the whole strategy of employing the content, launching the content, keeping the content current, killing off the content that is no longer current, and all of those kinds of strategic things, not tactical things, but strategic things. So this comes from, and I'm going to be showing you a list of books. This comes from one of the books out there, which I realize over here you can't see, Content Strategy by Wachter and Betcher. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing those names correctly, but anyway. So here are the books, and these are almost all of the books that are out in content strategy. And when I started, when I was updating this presentation for TCANZ, a new one came along, so I bought it on Amazon and read it to try to keep current. But as you can see, it wouldn't take you very long to sort of read everything there is on content strategy because it's that new. So I realize the font is small, but I did this on purpose because I wanted to show you all the books on one slide for you to see that there's just, it's new, it's in its infancy, but is there anything in particular that you notice about this list?
Since 2009.
Exactly. So it started in 2009, Content Strategy for the Web. That's Christina Halverson. She's the one that kicked this off. She has a company in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the United States called Brain Traffic. She got this idea that content strategy was something that her clients needed. She put together a conference on content strategy. She brought the key people that she thought were making change in this area, and it just kind of kicked off. So then she wrote this book, Content Strategy for the Web, and it was so popular, it was everyone's sort of go-to resource that she published the second edition in 2012 with a colleague of hers at her company, and then she's just sort of stepped aside and let it roll on its own. So since then, what you see is that in 2009, there were a couple of books, the Web Content Strategist Bible, for example, 2010, 2011, 2012, and here's the new one, 2014, The Language of Content Strategy. So pretty much in just a few short years, starting from 2009, so in the last 5 years, this discipline, this emerging discipline has gone from 0 to exploded. And I think that's pretty exciting. You used to be able to say this sort of thing about usability. So I've been in the business for 20 plus years in usability, and in the early days I would be thrilled if somebody could spell it. You know, and then I would be thrilled if they could really say in a sentence what it was, because the typical response, oh yeah, we have usability, it's built into all of our products, that kind of thing. So the same, and of course that battle continues to be waged. You would think everyone would be doing usability and usability testing, but they don't. However, the same thing is now happening with content strategy. So when I went to STC conferences way back 20 plus years ago, I started to hear people talking about usability, and I started going to those sessions, and it was even under the guise of things like a content audit That would be a very early way of thinking about usability and so forth. And then listening to people like Ginny Reddish and Whitney Quisenberry and Judy Ramey and people like that, Joanne Hackos, some of the people who have been to TCANZ to talk as well. I started to see a great career path for content for usability and built it into the program that I was teaching and developed a course in it, built a lab. And now, to make a long story short, I see the exact same thing happening for content strategy. So this is new, and you should look into it because it is coming. And if it hasn't come already, then I hope I will energize you to make it happen here in New Zealand at the companies where you work, and possibly read some of these books to get some background about how to do it. So who are these authors? All right, so we looked back at all these authors and we see names. I've only put in last names and everything, but here's the fascinating thing. Anybody know what these authors by and large have in common? Women, yes, that's true. They are women. Someone pointed that out to me as well. What else do they have in common? Anybody? Thoughts?
They're all American?
They're all American. Yes, I think that's true as well.
They all come from the TechCom field.
They all come from TechCom, which of course might explain why they're all women and from the United States, because if you go to a conference in the United States for technical communication, it is not going to have this lovely mix of men and women like I see here at this conference. It's going to be primarily women. And I don't want to get off on that tangent. But anyway, yes, it's technical communication. Now what I like about that is that it demonstrates that technical communicators individually and collectively have seen this as the future and are in the forefront of making this change. And so this is what I think is very exciting for us as technical communicators, is that we can get in on the ground floor and that we can do something significant about changing the way our organizations think about content and manage content. All right, so mostly, not every single person on that list is a technical communicator. Now, let's take a look at the trends. So if we look at, what words, how words are working in Google, you can do this. You can see that for the topic content strategy, the interest over time was fairly low until we hit that point right here in 2009, exactly as you said, when the first book came out, and then you just see a sort of steady and continuous growth. Now it hasn't exploded, it's still new, it's only been 5 years, but you can definitely see that the starting point, the kickoff point, was Christina Halverson, 2009, and Confab, the conference that she organized to get people going on this topic. Now, where is the interest growing? So I think this map is kind of interesting. So you can see that in the United States is sort of leading the way, but Australia right behind that, and the United Kingdom, Canada, and India. Unfortunately, I regret to say, they don't tell us what's happening in New Zealand on this map. So I'm not quite sure where New Zealand would stand in this, but this was what I was able to find about where the regional interest lies for this topic, content strategy. So now what do content strategists do? So I highlighted in red and also in green the keywords here. So the first word is audit. So any of these books that talk about the methodology for content strategy, the first thing they will say is you want to do an audit of all your content. Usually they describe, creating a spreadsheet, looking at when it was published, where it resides, when it was last revised, those kinds of things. Excuse me. So you start with a content inventory and you set that up as a way of knowing where your content lives and what media it is published in, and when it was last revised, and so forth. And then you plan for, so you go from an audit to planning. That is, what content do we need? What content can we kill? What content needs to be revised? What content needs to be expanded? What content needs to go to other media? And that sort of thing. So you plan for the creation, publication, and governance. And I think governance is one of the key words, because what we tend to do is get it out there and then we never think about it again. And so the governance piece is really important, especially with content that resides in a live medium like the web. And so governance of useful and usable content. So the original thinking about content was, let's throw everything up so that we can say it's a complete compendium of all the content we have. And now the thinking in terms of content strategy is, what do we need? What do our users need? What's relevant, useful, usable, and so forth? The usability words. And then how do we manage the content creation? And how do we manage a revision schedule? So some of these pieces you're probably already doing, but some of them you probably haven't thought about because it does require a strategic view. It's a high-level view, not an in-the-trenches kind of view. And then finally, the last item on the list is to create content. So if we think about technical communicators, we tend to think here at the bottom, create content, but what we should be doing when we think about the future is how we move up towards the top of this, which is the strategic piece, the auditing function, the inventory function, the planning function, the managing function. So content strategists are managers. And it could be manager of a group, or it could be manager of all the content for the organization. I mean, there are lots of ways to think about management. And people are starting to get this in school, in some of the programs. So if you've got a course, for example, in content or in content management, you definitely want to be thinking about how to add content strategy to that if you don't already. So how do you know if your content is useful and usable? What would you think the answer to that question would be? You would test it, exactly. So that's what we're going to do now, is we're going to move from what is content strategy, what are the components of content strategy, how has the field evolved over a quick 5 years, and now we're going to look at how I participated or helped clients conduct usability testing of two completely different projects, two completely different clients, and what the role of content was in each one, and how we determined that from usability testing. So, here are the sorts of things you hear about content in usability testing sessions. And how many of you have ever done any usability testing? Okay, great. So some of this may be familiar to you. We know the content isn't right, but don't worry, we'll get to it later, right? Tell the participant, don't worry about the content. Right. So we hear that one a lot. We're testing the site, but we don't have the content yet. Okay, we do prototype testing, but we don't have any content, right? So don't worry about the content. We're really just interested in design and navigation and all that, but you don't need any content for that, right? Right. Or we're testing the site, but we don't have the help or the user assistance yet, right? Now this one happens a lot when you're testing, when you're the documentation group and you're able to observe or participate in a usability study of the interface, whatever it is, the product. I use those words sort of interchangeably. It could be anything. And you don't have the help or the user assistance built out yet because the product is still in development and you're looking at a prototype. Now, actually, this can be useful to do this. And when I moderate sessions in which we don't have the help or the user assistance, what I say is, there isn't any help or user assistance yet, but what we want to know is, when would you click on the button that says help? Or when would you click on something that you would expect to open up some embedded assistance? Because that's what we want to know. And that's how we'll learn what needs to be built out there for you to support you. So that can be helpful, but nonetheless it would be even more helpful if there were actually some content there when somebody clicked on it. So they not only say, well, this is where I'd want help, but that help helped or didn't help, right? So these are the kinds of things we typically hear in usability testing, in which content is an afterthought, unfortunately. Or, and we saw this yesterday, it was in our game last night, I guess, or the content is just Greeked in. It's just lorem ipsum, which is just so insulting to us as content writers, that they care so little about the content that they've just Greeked it in, so it doesn't even have any meaning whatsoever. All right, so what are the top findings that we get when we're doing usability testing? So this is not necessarily just about the content, but what are the top things that typically emerge in any sort of usability test from those of you who've had the experience? What might be one? What kinds of issues do you find?
Missing steps.
Pardon me?
Missing steps.
Missing steps. Great. Yes. Missing information, missing steps. What else?
People want more thorough details about what's in a screen or an interface.
Okay, so they want more information. So that goes along with missing steps, more information.
Often they can tell what to do, but they don't know what it means.
Okay, so the content doesn't have clear meaning for them. Right, what else?
They never go and look for content in the way you expect them to.
Yes, they always surprise us, don't they? Yeah, which is so wonderful.
Consistency of language.
Consistency of language and terminology, yes. So moving beyond just content itself, one of the things that we almost always find in usability testing are terminology issues. So can we think kind of big picture, what else might we find besides terminology issues? Yes?
People are different.
People are different, meaning?
They do different things, think about things in different ways.
They think about things in different ways, but typically if they are goal-directed in a usability study, if they have a particular scenario with a goal, they're probably likely, not entirely, but they're likely to try to go down a similar path, which may be the wrong path, and there's a lot of consistency in seeing everybody going the wrong way. And that would be what? What's another issue that raises that you oftentimes see in usability testing? Navigation, exactly. So there could be issues of terminology, there could be issues of navigation, information architecture goes along with that, those kinds of things. So I'll show you what my little list came up with. Findability, they can't find things they're looking for. It ought to be here somewhere. They're pulling on different drop downs, whatever, looking through a table of contents if it were book form, that sort of thing. Navigation, terminology. The page design has problems. No one's looking to the right, for example, or no one's looking at the bottom, or they're not scrolling if we're talking about a web interface or an application. And the mental model, does anyone know what mental model means?
Is that where they get lost? So they use navigation and they get lost.
That would be, yeah, that would still be navigation and findability. Mental model is something else.
Would
Yes,
it be more
Wanda.
familiarity with what you've done previously in
Yes.
other applications and transferring that knowledge to the current one?
Yes, so mental model is the picture, the image, the experience that we bring to a new interface based on what we already know. So we all bring those mental models with us to any new product or interface, and that is how we start out, by saying to ourselves subliminally, is this going to be familiar to me? Is this going to work the way I expect it to work? So mental model is a very common finding in usability testing, that you have designed something differently from the way the user expects it to work based on prior experience. So these are typically, for me, in my work, the top findings that we get in usability testing. So let's see how they apply to content. All right, so in content, we drill down and get a little bit more specific, and we ask these kinds of questions. This comes from Colleen Jones, who wrote one of the early books. She was at that first Confab conference with Christina Halverson. Colleen Jones lives in Atlanta, where I live. And her book is called Clout. And so from her book, can users find and view the content? Now these are some of the things that you pointed out when we were talking about usability testing. Can they find the content? Can they view the content? Do they understand the content when they get there? This is a really, really big one, because oftentimes in usability testing, we'll stop at the find place. Did they find the content? Great, then we know it works. Do we? Can they understand the content? Can they act on the content in the way the content is intended to allow them to act, or to provide the means for them to act? And can they complete the action? So I think that came up. Can they complete the action? Do they have enough information to be able to take the action, whatever it is? So content usability is a little bit different from that top level findability or information architecture or navigation or mental model. It's once we found it, does it work for us? And is it what the users want and need? So is it the right amount of content? Is it written at the right level of readability? And those things like personas that we were talking about, are we writing to the right person? Is it presented with good information design? Chunking and bullets and a good sized font and a font that's readable in the format or in the context of use and those kinds of things. And is it organized in a way that works for users? Now that means that it has the information in the order of priority for the users. So maybe what they need is at the bottom of a long bulleted list, but they would prefer to see it at the top. These are the kinds of things that might come up as they're thinking out loud in a usability test and they're talking about the content. And does the writing help users skim so they don't have to read every word, but they can grab and go with the information that's been provided because of the way it has been designed and organized on the web. And these techniques, by the way, come from my very good friend Ginny Reddish, whom I'm sure a lot of you know or know of, and her book Letting Go of the Words. It's writing content for the web. I highly recommend it if you haven't heard of it, Letting Go of the Words. And although she's talking about writing for the web, I find that there's a lot of usefulness about writing effective content for users. Her premise is that we're engaged in a conversation with our users, and thinking about it as a conversation means that you're thinking about what is the question that the user is asking, and then how does the content, whatever medium it's in, respond to that question to provide the answer. So are the words the ones the users understand, and do users interpret the images accurately? So of course, words and images working together. All right, so why does content matter? And these are only a couple of lots of reasons why content matters, but from a business perspective, which is very important, the bottom line, it increases sales, increases user satisfaction, which increases sales, increases recommendations, increases referrals, positive reviews, and reduces calls to technical support or customer service, which reduces expenses. So those are all interlocking circles, but they're all part of why content matters. And the reason I include this slide is because this is the argument that you might need to present to persuade your companies to think strategically about content and to apply the principles of content strategy going forward and as you're planning, developing your content group. All right, so now we're going to focus on the two case studies that I presented here that focus on the content. All right, so the first one is for a client, IHG. That stands for Intercontinental Hotels Group. It's a worldwide group of hotels that include Intercontinental, Holiday Inn, and a lot of other brands inside the group. And this particular case study was an internal product for general managers of hotels around the whole who would use this software application to create plans and strategies to make their hotels more environmentally friendly or greener. So it was things like how to reduce water consumption, how to reduce the footprint, how to deal with waste, how to buy cleaning products that are environmentally friendly, just from the grandiose to the small. And so this case study was looking at general managers of hotels, large and small, all around the world, in all the regions where there are hotels in this group, and finding out from the general managers and from their chief engineers in the big hotels how easy or difficult it was to use this application to reach the goal of improving their environmental footprint. So, round one of this study, and this study went on for a couple of years. It's a big project. Round one had 14 users. Now, one of the things I like about doing usability testing, particularly qualitative studies, is that you can get very, very good results with small numbers. And I'm a big advocate of qualitative empirical research, small numbers, carefully targeted so that you're looking at people with similar goals, similar skills, similar understanding of the interface and those sorts of things, and you just get a big wow factor when you do that, having them do the same task, when you'll quickly see what the issues are. 14 users. So the goals here were to understand the user's navigation and workflow, to understand, the client wanted to know about defects and system feedback issues, which really isn't a usability issue, but if you come across something that doesn't work, it does affect usability, and so you do want to be able to report back, this is a bug, this doesn't work, and so forth. They were interested in that, and they were interested in, and I highlight in red, perceptions regarding content, terminology, labels, and visuals. So they really thought they weren't very interested in drilling down into what the content was actually doing, but at least they wanted to know users' perceptions of the usability of the content at first glance. And they were particularly interested in training requirements, because in the beginning of this project, they thought that all of their managers were going to require some training on using the product, and they wanted to know what to provide the training on, and whether there should be a getting started tutorial, and whether there should be some sort of online training or a training manual that went out, and all those kinds of things. So that's what the client wanted. So here's round one. So in round one, users liked the concept. They loved the idea of an application that would allow them to have a plan to make their hotels more environmentally friendly. But they hated the execution. That is, the product sucked. So they were very unhappy with how hard it was to understand the application, they didn't understand so many things about it. They were very frustrated, so they were motivated. They wanted to like it, but they couldn't bring themselves to like it. It was just too hard. And they said things like, I believe this will be useful once everyone understands it. How many times have we heard that in usability testing? I rated this a 5 on a scale of 1 to 5 because I think that once I figured it out, it would be okay, right? Yeah, but we saw you struggle like crazy. How much time are you going to invest in trying to figure this out? So that's a very typical quote. Plus, the other interesting thing is that there were 11 calls for help. In my usability lab at Southern Polytechnic at the time, we had a phone that was connected to the control room. And we said, you know, if you get to a place where you're stuck and you would really need help and you can't figure this out on your own, give us a call, because we want to know when you would be calling headquarters or somebody to come in and help you. 11 calls for assistance. Now, it only came from 4 people, so not every single person is ever going to call for help, right? Some people just don't. But of the 4 people who needed help, they called 11 times. So it didn't take just one call to fix it. It was, okay, I'm stuck again. What do I do now? I'm stuck again. What do I do now? So that is very, very poor usability from a very limited number of participants for real users, general managers of hotels who would purchase this product for their hotel and then use it to improve their hotel's footprint. And what they said over and over again is the content is overwhelming. Way too much content, of the wrong kind of content, not designed for my use, and it's unhelpful. And the reason why the content was overwhelming and unhelpful is that they took what I call brochureware. That is, they dumped everything they had into the application without any changes. So it was just, you know, it was like taking paper documents and just pouring them into a software application. And so it was like, whoa, when you would click on something, way too much information of the wrong kind of information. So that was round one. So round two was 8 months later, 12 users. They completely threw out the entire development of the application at that point, fired the team, the original team that had developed it, brought in a whole new team with more people this time, and did another round of usability testing at an earlier stage. All new prototype design, but look at this, no change in the content. See, they weren't focusing on the content. I was, but they didn't ask me. They weren't focusing on the content. They were focusing on the interface, and they just took that same content and they just moved it over to the new interface just to see if maybe the interface would fix everything. So they had the same goal as round one. They wanted to learn the user's perceptions, remember, not their actual understanding, but just perceptions of the content, terminology, labeling, and visuals. But now they had a new goal. They wanted to measure the SUS score. Now the SUS score, we'd turn them on to the system usability scale. Anybody know what the system usability scale is? Okay, so I think I have an example of this. Yes, now I know you can't see this, but I'll just tell you what it says, and hopefully these slides will be made available, but if not, you can get them from me. The system usability scale was developed by John Brook, who was an engineer at Digital Corporation in 1986. He made it available for free to anybody who wanted to use it. It is the most widely used scale for evaluating the usability of a product. It is built into Moray. How many of you, I know Moray, I know TechSmith is one of the sponsors here. How many of you use Moray or are familiar with Moray? So Moray is the logging software that TechSmith, that's Camtasia, Snagit, and all that, they've created Moray. Moray is the logging software that almost all usability companies or people that have their own labs, even portable labs like I do now, use. It has a lot of power and it's pretty usable, and it builds the system usability scale into a study, so you can just pull it up and have people complete it. So what it is, I'll just read you a couple of these questions. It's a Likert scale, and it goes back and forth. So 5 of the questions are on one end of the scale, and the other 5 are on the opposite end. So I think that I would like to use the system frequently. You strongly agree, you strongly disagree. I found the system unnecessarily complex. I thought the system was easy to use. And and nowadays, people change the word system to website, application, mobile device, whatever it might be. You can plug that word in to make the change. And what you get when a person completes these 10 questions, it's called a quick and dirty scale, according to John Brook, the author, because it takes almost no time to complete it, and you take all of the compiled scores, which Moray very easily gives you a number for. You don't have to do the math yourself. Moray does it, and you get a number. And what we know, the reason why this is such a powerful tool, is that there is a meta-analysis of the number that you get using the system usability scale that has analyzed 500 studies across lots of different disciplines with more than 5,000 responses, and the average score is 68. 68. So what that says is 2 things. One, if your study came up with a score of 60, that would tell you that in general, your particular participants rated their experience with your product lower than the average for the system usability scale. However, what's more interesting is that you use that score, that composite score, as a baseline for your own usability testing, so that when you iterate, when you revise and test again, you know that the last time you got 60. Could we get to 65 this time? Could we get to 70? So this is what Intercontinental Hotels Group was after. They wanted to see if they could raise their score as they continued to design and develop the product. So that's the system usability scale. So they were very interested in this. So this is how it went for them. Round 1, they got a score of 54. That's about as bad as it gets. All right, so even though people tend to inflate their score, right? When they tell you what their experience was with the product, they tend to rate it a little bit higher. This is just human nature than what you actually experienced. Nonetheless, the overall score on that first round of testing was 54. So Intercontinental Hotels Group says, we got to do better than that. So the second round of testing, they got the score up to 73. That's a huge advance. So they were feeling pretty good about themselves. Wow, okay, we're on the right track here. So they liked that, but then they kept going. So round 3 of usability testing was 5 months later, and here it was with only 4 users. Now 4 users is really getting down to almost too few. But the reason why they only wanted to do 4 users is that this was a 2-day study. It was pre-launch. They were in beta. They were just getting ready to launch it out to anyone in the Intercontinental Hotels group that wanted to purchase it. All of the participants, all 4 of the participants had used that very first version, which was horrible, right? So it's like saying if you want to move from DOS to Word, you've already had the experience of DOS and you know how tough that is, or something that's just really awful, but you've gotten used to it, but you know it's awful, and then you see something that's so much better, you go, wow. So they had all been working with the current version of the project, of the software, which was terrible. On the very first day, they set up all their hotel data so that it was actually their hotel they were working with. They came back the second day, and they had to read reports and create action plans. So they had to actually do things that would help them set up what their hotel was going to do as a plan to make it more green. The results were that the users loved the changes. They thought, oh, this is really getting to be good now. I can see the potential for this. They felt that the concepts and the functions were more fully integrated. They felt that the home page was helpful. When we first started testing, they didn't know what they were looking at. This is my home page? I had no idea. It looks like I should be booking a room in a hotel or something. So they finally understood, oh, this is my home page. This is my hotel. It's been customized for me. So they liked that, and that they thought that the application supported their goals in general. So things are looking up. Now, this is the funny part. So the SUS score is, remember, 54 in round 1, 73 in round 2. Any guesses on what the SUS score was in round 3? Did it go down? Any other guesses? Some people think it went down. No. It went up to 94. Now, I have never seen a score of 94 before or since this particular study, and I caution anybody not to make too much of this, all right? Because it was only 4 participants who had been using the prior tool, which was horrible, and they were very excited about the potential for the new tool. And it was too small a number. It was only 4 people, so you really can't do much with that. Nonetheless, Intercontinental Hotels Group put out a big PR thing, and they bragged about the number, and they went to their conference, and they showed everybody how they got a 94, and so they really went to town on the number. All right. So our recommendations on the basis of this study, this 3-phase study, was to test with new users. Remember, they were only working with people who were already customers of theirs, who were already using the software the old way, which was terrible. They didn't understand the new user experience. One of the goals of the project was to get other hotels to buy it, but they had no idea what the new user experience was like. To refine the current content, they'd still not done a single thing with the content. To test with new content, so that you revise the content, redesign the content, and then test that, and to incorporate context-sensitive help because they didn't have any. And the users kept saying, oh, well, I'd really like to know what that means. I'd really like to find out how I do that, and those kinds of things. So those were our recommendations. So round 4 of this was 1 year later, 16 users, and this time, for the first time, they had SMEs. They had hired SMEs. Subject matter experts in the content of the website of the application, which was environmental and friendly and all of those sorts of things. So they had people with degrees in this who knew about this area and who were subject matter experts. So that's the first time they actually focused on the content. And that the new users were included in the participant pool now, and that the new goal was to learn how well the users can understand and act on the content. So you remember back a number of slides ago, I said, not just can you find the content, but can you understand it? Can you act on it? Can you achieve a goal as a result of reading and absorbing the content? So those were the goals for this study. Participants were directed to find ways to make their hotel more sustainable, so they were very goal-driven to do this, to use the content to select a solution to match their goal, to show us how they would implement this solution, and to add this item to their action plan. So it was very structured use of the content to support a goal. Not just did you find it, and not just did you read it, but can you use it to translate what you are reading into an action that makes sense to you in terms of your job. I got very excited about this. Now I know you can't see this, but I'm just putting this up here as an example of the slide so you can sort of see what the content looked like. So there's a lot going on in this interface, and there's stuff at the top, and there's a left nav thing called action groups right here, and there's something called green housekeeping products and practices, and there's tools over here. You could scroll down, there's more stuff down here. So users would say things like, what am I supposed to click on? I'm here, I want to take an action, but I can't tell what the action should be. Users said, I love this because we get this all the time. I imagine I'd have to read all these things. It looks nice, it has some good ideas, but I want actions that can profit for our hotel. So these are high-level managers basically saying, I can't take the time to do this. I want to do it, I know it's important that I do it, but I can't take the time to do it in the way you've organized the content. I'm looking for a solution rather than an idea, right? All right, so the top negative findings then were findability. I can't find what I'm looking for. I want low-cost solutions. Organization and terminology. What's the difference between, these were different terms to organize the tabs in the interface. What's the difference between green solutions and action plan? What's the difference between action plan and action list? So we always get terminology issues. We always get mental model issues. I don't know if I should be going here or there. What are levels? I'm scoring points to get to the next level of, things like LEED certification, which is important in different parts of the world. But what are these levels? Not everybody knew these levels in different parts of the world. And content, there's lots of content, but it's still the wrong content, and it's in the wrong order. So it would start with the most expensive solutions, for example, and then finally it would be, what types of cleaning products you could use, or a low flush toilet, or something like that at the very bottom of the list. So the SUS score, remember it went from 94, the SUS score now went to 50. So the good news is that the SMEs were there. It was the SMEs who organized the usability testing. It was the content creators who learned from this what they needed to do to take that content that had never changed and to begin to strategize how to deliver content that would work for the users in the context of their use. All right, so my second study, a shorter one, my second study is a website called FootSmart. And FootSmart is a website for people who have problems with their feet for two reasons. So the largest group of users is women, and there is a smaller group of users who are men. So we did a very, very small study for FootSmart. I worked with Colleen Jones, who wrote that book Clout in Atlanta, because she had created a whole content strategy for this website to change the whole way that they organized, presented, and designed the content to improve sales, really. So first you start with providing information, and then that translates into buying shoes or arch supports or things like that. Now this study was kind of interesting because the women, the persona of the woman who goes to the FootSmart website is that she is overweight, and she may have associated health problems connected with being overweight, but the result is that she has foot problems like fallen arches or like other things associated with that. So she's either directed or hears about or finds in a Google search the FootSmart website. The other less smaller but important audience is very physically fit men who sustain injuries from heavy athletic activity. So we have two very different audiences. So we have men who play basketball or run or play tennis, and then we have women who are more sedentary and both have issues associated with foot. So the study goals were to verify that the new content that had been written by Colleen Jones, the content strategist, that the new content was going to be better than the old by comparing two versions, the A version and the B version. Another goal was to understand how users respond to a change in the voice and tone of the new content versus the old content, the quality and credibility of the new content versus the old. It was friendlier, but did it come across still as credible? And the content and completeness of the new versus the old. So each of the 6 participants in the study, very small, one-day study, 4 women, 2 men. Each of the participants was presented with one of the 2 versions, and they didn't know which one was the new one and which one was the old one because they looked exactly the same. So the A version was the current one and B was the new one, but they didn't know. So they were asked to do certain things, compare merchandise layouts and indicate their desire to purchase on the basis of what they read. So here are the women and here are the men. So the men were younger and so forth. All right. So these were their scenarios or tasks. They had to view an article and give feedback on the design of it. Does it look like something you'd want to read? You know, how would you rate that? That sort of thing. The visual appeal of it. Secondly, they had to read the article itself, which was on a topic I couldn't even spell when I first was invited to participate in the study, but it's called plantar fasciitis, which is a sort of foot issue that apparently a lot of people have. So they would, and they were recruited on the basis of having foot issues so that they would be familiar with plantar fasciitis and maybe even had a doctor prescribe something for it. They had to answer some questions, comprehension questions, after reading the article to determine whether they understood it correctly. And they had to shop for a heel cushion, and then they had to do the same thing the other way. So it was half of them started with the A version, half of them started with the B version, and then switched. All right, so this is the current version, and again, I realize it's too much content to see from anywhere in this context, but I just want you to see that it's an article, what causes plantar fasciitis. There's some stuff you can buy over here. There's some information about it. It scrolls down, there's even more, and then at every paragraph, there's a shop now, shop now, shop now, kind of all the way through it. So that's the current version. The prototype version, which Colleen and her team organized, is much more visually appealing. So it starts off with an illustration of the foot. The language is much more user-friendly. What areas of my foot hurt? The tone is more conversational, using my and I and we. And it eliminates the shop now, shop now, shop now all the way through. So in a nutshell, those were some of the big differences between them. Here's what we learned from this particular study. All 6 people liked the prototype version better. Wow, can't ask for better than that, since they didn't know what we were testing. They didn't know if we were testing, we wanted A to win or B to win. So all 6 people liked the prototype that Colleen Jones, the content strategist, had created. All 6 found the heel cushion more easily on the B version than the A version, which means sales would be increased. So the client really likes to know that. 5 out of the 6 would consult a doctor before they made their first purchase. Now, this is very helpful information because it says what it says for these users is they don't go to the website to make a purchase. They go to the website to learn. And if they're pleased with what they learn, they establish a sense of trust with the website, that when they discuss this with their doctor and the doctor says, yes, a heel cushion would be a good thing for you, then they're very likely to come back to that website that they trusted to give them good information and make the purchase. So we don't necessarily need to see a purchase right away the first time somebody comes. They may just be a visitor and they want to sort of assess the credibility of the website. 3 of the 6 liked the lack of sell, that shop now, shop now, shop now, shop now that was on A. They liked the fact that it wasn't there on B. It felt more trustworthy to them. 3 of the 6 complained about redundant content on A. That is, they kept saying the same thing, and they said too much in A, which was the current version. And 3 of the 6 had additional questions after reading A, and 2 of the 6 wanted the option to access more content in B. So the content was reduced in the prototype version, and what they learned from that as a recommendation is that they should provide some links to get more information. So this may be enough for you, but if you want to read more, if you want to learn more about particular topics, have that sort of hyperlinking kind of feel to it. So the winner here was content strategy, which was so validating because I so rarely get the chance to really test good content and to be able to demonstrate why an investment in good content pays off in sales, customer satisfaction, and so on. So, I'm going to end with how can you leave the conference and do something about the way your company thinks about content. So this is my motivational part of the talk. You want to plan the content you control. So again, you can't change the top of your organization, I'm sure, for many of you, but you can still plan the content that you control. You can start thinking more strategically about the content that you control, that your group controls, that your manager or supervisor controls. You want to create an overview of the types of content. You want to do that inventory so that you've got the spreadsheet that talks about these are all the pieces of content that we have that resides in all these different places, whether it's in print, web, mobile, wherever it might be. And marketing, that would be another piece. Some of the content we write goes into marketing as well. So you want to create an overview of the types. And most UI content falls into one of these 5 categories. So it could be labels, buttons, help text, pop-ups, user-generated messages. So you could break your content inventory into these types of categories and catalog and know where all of that content resides. You want to think about the tone and treatment of these types. Do we have a consistent voice, a consistent tone, a consistent style to the way we communicate our content? Particularly important if it's being written by different groups. Are we maintaining a persona for our company? You want to collaborate if you possibly can on personas of your users. That is, who are our users? Can we come up with whatever research we might be able to gather about who they are, what they want with our content, how they use our content, that sort of thing, what they know about the content, what they need to know about the content, and so forth. And you want to develop a style guide for the content of your users. Now that's not just how to punctuate and how to capitalize and those kinds of things, which I know everybody already has a style guide on, but really a style guide on things like the tone, things like the form of address, things like, well, what we saw for the census. I mean, that was great. Those of you who sat in on how they changed that to a storytelling approach. That was just a marvelous way of talking about how they created a style sheet for how to write that kind of content. So developing a style guide for the content for your users, and you want to get involved in testing. Now that is something you can do cheaply, unofficially, below the radar, if you can't get company buy-in, so that you can have some, because some feedback is always better than no feedback. Yeah?
Could you talk a little bit more about the types of content?
This one here, labels, buttons, help text.
No, the one above, Is that the labels, buttons, or text is what used to be typed?
Well, it could be, but in a larger sense, it could be things like marketing messages, it could be documentation, it could be website content about who we are, it could be a lot of different things depending upon what your company does, what your organization does, so that it's all representing the same image of the company.
Because quite often, you know, I personally struggle with things like, is type of content a video?
Right.
Or is it marketing material? Or is it a bullet list?
Yes, and those are excellent examples. So video is definitely content, for example.
Right, so those would all fall into the area of type.
Yes, yes, and that's a better example than what I was coming up with. That's right. So all of this is, so video is huge now, and so that is definitely an area of content, and making sure that the message in video, that the approach used in video is representative of what you're doing in all areas of the company, so you come together with a unified voice to present your content. And get involved in testing. So what we have here then is content strategy plus usability testing equals good business.